Hi, I'm Bob the Hollow, here to talk about the Abyss, the Deep, and the Dark. These terms have all been used interchangeably, but a generally accepted distinction would be that the Abyss and the Deep are places, while the Dark is the energy that derives from them. But these are very basic definitions and they leave much to be discussed. What is the connection between the Abyss and the Deep? What is the Primordial serpent's role? How does Unkindled Ash fit into all of this? In this video, I'll try my best to answer all of these questions, but before we delve into it, let's take a moment to look at how it all came to be. In Demon Souls, there was a grey fog spreading out from the kingdom of Boletaria, threatening to cover the entire world. Inside the fog, there lived demons who absorbed the souls of all living beings, and these hollowed, soulless beings would decay with the world around them. If the spread of the fog wasn't stopped, that would be the end of the world as we know it. Though it will never be confirmed, the Soulsborne franchises are heavily implied to be connected, and it has been stipulated that the world of ancient dragons in Dark Souls is a direct result of the spread of the Old One's grey fog from Demon Souls. What I wish to put forth is that, deliberately or not, this is an artistic representation of the hit-death end of the universe theory. The end is gone, and it will be gone again. Simply put, every system tends toward a state of highest entropy, which can be described as the amount of unavailable energy to do work. In our ever-expanding universe that longs for equilibrium, everything decays and dissipates. The result would inevitably be a state of universal rest and death, through an endless space of action involving the transformation of potential energy into palpable motion and hence into heat. Then, to a single finite mechanism running down like a clock and stopping forever. But it is possible that, in the far distance, an event called quantum tunneling will shatter the equilibrium, a new Big Bang ushering a new universe, restarting the cycle all over again. Thus, the first flame was born. Besides being a very poetic way to talk about science, this also helps us understand how things work within the Souls universe. The grey fog world had balance, but a new system was introduced. The first flame brought disparity, heat and cold, light and dark. The two systems will try to balance each other out, eventually leading to the great desert where we fight Gale, the next ending of this brave new world. And at the same time, this new system will be trying to balance itself out by bringing together all its many parts. A process that can be seen starting in Lothric and culminating at the end of the Age of Fire, with all the kingdoms from all the times merging together next to the kiln of the first flame. This process also applies to the Dark, who is so incessantly trying to fill its own void. The dark Chasm of Old would consume everything it could, the shards of the Abyss would consume powerful kings, bonfires and its firekeepers are, functionally, storage units for humanity. The Dark Wraiths gather humanity through the power of the Dark Soul, the Locust Preachers should be gathering humanity through the power of preaching, and humanity itself gathered around Menace, voluntarily or otherwise. Light and dark are two sides of the same coin, unequivocally different, while at the same time remaining part of the same whole, both parts fighting for supremacy, both sides destined to lose. There can be no victors, only the inexorable march for equilibrium will settle this war. Now, this is not an attempt to explain Dark Souls through science. I'm not saying thermodynamics should be canon, I'm just saying let's use it for comparison, to help us understand the mechanics that are already in place. Old-time players probably don't need the following clarification, but newcomers might. I've seen it being stated before, that the gods came from the first flame and that humans came from the dark, but this isn't true. Then, from the dark, they came. Before they were godlike creatures, they were shambling beings aching in shape to hollows. All of them and all of us stemming from the dark. And I think it's also worth noting that all of the souls were found in the first flame, the Dark Soul included. So, if our bodies and souls are all from the same place, then what is it that distinguishes them from us? Well, there is one tiny thing called the humanity, the very same thing that asked us once to consider that souls aren't the source of all life, that maybe there are others and that humanity could be one of them. A question that is quite ingenious in itself, since both the old and the new propositions are misleading. Remember that there are many living creatures that require neither in order to be alive, ancient dragons, Vendrick and Alsana among them. But nevertheless, humanity really is a distinguishing feature and it will become relevant again later in the video. Now that's out of the way, I'll say that the most widespread misconception about the Abyss that I have seen to date is that it was created by Menas when his humanity went wild during the events that led to the fall of Ulasil. The problem here is that this concept was born from mistranslation. Menas, being called Father of the Abyss, naturally lends himself to the role of its creator, but in his original Japanese title, they used a kanji that is quite different from the one used for Father. This kanji has two befitting meanings, Lord and Guardian Spirit. I personally lean more toward Guardian Spirit or a mixture of both, since when they mean Lord, they use the slight different kanji O, as in Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, or the Dark Lord. Also, with the introduction of the Ring Knights, there came a problem in continuity. Their items' descriptions state that their gear was forged in the Abyss, meaning that the Abyss would have been around since the first flame first appeared, probably being the place of origin of the would-be gods of old, or, at the very least, since shortly after that, during whatever period of time the war against the ancient dragons may have lasted. Either way, it would have predated Menas' ascent by a long-ass time. Now, if you do agree with me in that Menas didn't create the Abyss but instead simply became a part of it, then problem solved, there is no conflict here. Moving forward in the timeline, we reach Drangleic in Dark Souls 2. A lot has changed and the Abyss itself is now fragmented, spread throughout the world. Its shards became the lost children of the Abyss, walking the earth in search of power. One thing that hasn't changed is problems with translations. The items crafted from Nashandra's soul mention an Old One of the Abyss, which, in fact, is pure fabrication. The Ruffle Axe's description is the same on this regard as, let's say, the Bowl of Want, but its English translation is more accurate in that it says the things that called it home. Yet, both translations fail to hint that these shards would have been created from the Abyss itself just as much as from what could be found within. Fortunately, Soul of Nashandra's original Japanese pre-scholar of the first scene description is pretty clear about this, saying that she was born not in the dark but from it. But the Abyss isn't just enticing shards of darkness, it still has a focus point, a place to call home. The Dark Lurker Soul's Japanese description says that the chasm is what is left after the shards were spread. Also, according to Grendel, the Dark Chasm of Old was a great void that now absorbs all things and can even be quoted saying, "Young Undead, you've discovered the truest dark within you, a deep, deep dark it is, the dark that we must all face. We need the Abyss more now than ever." The chasm is simply the Abyss by another name. Like a great tide it will grow until, inevitably, it subsides again. And then, in the times of Dark Souls 3, darkness spreads, it consumes and corrupts, but there are rumors of a dark that is deeper still. The last installment of the series brings with it the concept of the deep. We know that it was a sacred place, that it became the resting place for abhorrent things, that Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, has seen visions of a deep sea. But what exactly is the deep? Well, I believe that it is a place within the chasm, just another part of the Abyss. Not only did Grendel insist on calling it a deeper dark, the Pilgrims of the Dark were literally diving deeper into the Abyss, looking for whatever might reside at its bottom, and judging by all the water that can be seen pouring down through the chasm, I think that its bottom is a prime candidate for Aldrich's vision of a deep sea. Also, if all humanity is returned to the Abyss, then that's where you'd find human dregs, since they will sink to the lowest depths imaginable. Lastly, the deep being called a once sacred place makes perfect sense in this context. Grendel specifically called it a sacred place. The Dark Lurker Soul isn't tainted by the dark, and he may have been the original owner of the Dragon Chime, a sacred chime held by Grendel, with divine levels of faith requirement that can withstand the dark of the chasm without losing its purity. And both NPC divers, Grendel and Falcon, seem to have been clerics once. Grendel is the only one with access to Profound Steel, a hex created by a farmer cleric. Falcon has access to an actual miracle, magic barrier, and to items that come from the sacred land of Lindelt, which implies that he was once a cleric too. He is also the only vendor that sells the Resonant Soul hexes, which are otherwise acquired only as a reward from the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant, meaning that he would be a diver himself. Now, all we gotta do is bring the deep to Undead, and the string that ties everything together is Pontiff Sulyvahn. A long time ago, in my video about AzureFelt, I pointed out the connection between the Pontiff, the Xanthos Scholars and the Pilgrims of the Dark. Sometime later, the first DLC came out and I was justified by the newfound fact that Sulyvahn would have been born inside the painting, which would have placed him in direct contact with Xanthos King Jeremiah. So let's follow this line of thought and shoehorn Dark Souls 2's lore into the lore of the series for good. The original Xanthos set belonged to Xanthos King Jeremiah, who was last seen inside the painted world of Ariamis. Then, in Dark Souls 2, it was found in the possession of Dark Diver Grendel, who granted access to the Dark Chasm of Old, the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant, and Castlight, a sorcery from the lost land of Ulasil. In Dark Souls 3, we have the Xanthos Scholars, who live to study the lost arts of sorcery, especially those that came from the lost land of Ulasil. Also, the Pilgrims of Londor have access to Chameleon, the only Ulasil sorcery that is not acquired through the Golden Scroll, which, as you might recall, is found in a cave alongside a chest that has already been looted, close to the spot where the alleged Xanthos Scholar's Yellowfinger Hazel invades you. I think she's the one who found the spell and passed it along to the Pilgrims, and if you have been following my videos, that will make complete sense, given my belief that both Sulyvahn and Rosaria would have been working in tandem with Londor. It also makes sense considering my belief that Dusk would have been imprisoned in AzureFelt dungeon at some point, in the cell where you can find the Dusk Crown Ring and the Xanthos Ashes. And now, may I remind you that said dungeon would have been under the control of Sulyvahn himself, and that he is already connected to the Pilgrims of Londor through the parasitic growth that they both share. And it is my belief that, since his powers seem to mimic those of the Dark Lurker, he would also somehow be connected to the Pilgrims of the Dark. Somehow be connected. Everything fits in pretty nicely except for two things, this somehow be connected and how did Grendel get his hands on the Xanthos set in the first place? Well, Ashes of Ariandel solves both problems at once. You see, the building that contained the painting that led you to the painted world of Ariamis is gone from Undead, and the last vestige that can be found of it is a painting guardian set found on a dead corpse. Nobody really knows where the painting is anymore, or what happened to it between the events of Dark Souls 1 and 3, but I think we can answer the second problem. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is talk about Hades' Tower of Flame. There is a theory, as old as the game itself, that the tower would have been created by Flann and Gwynevere. The basics of it are kind of obvious, really. The Cathedral of Blue is a building that seems to have been lifted straight out of Undead. It houses the Blue Sentinel's Covenant, which resembles the Blades of Darkmoon and also the old Dragon Slayer who, to put it lightly, resembles Ornstein. And the Tower of Flame, well, would have been built by Flame God Flann. Other connections would include the fact that the Covenant grants bountiful sunlight, one of the miracles formerly associated with Gwynevere, and these bird statues which came to my attention after reading a Reddit thread by Red Lion King, where he pointed out their similarity to Gwyn's statue. And if the similarity between these statues seems flimsy to you, I'd like to point out the similarity to the sun god Ra, and the bird depicted above the queen-like figure found on these panels located next to the Tower of Flame. So, the god of sunlight, depicted as a sun god watching over the princess of sunlight, makes sense to me. But this land was eventually taken by the sea, and at the time when we got to walk the lands of Drangleic, Lindelt had become the homeland of our faith instead. Their monastery holds their most precious rites and miracles, including soothing and bountiful sunlight, both of which are heavily associated with Gwynevere and were stolen, eventually finding their way back to Hades. The monastery also holds a dark secret in the only record of the kingdom's creation, guarded by the Archdrake sect, whose origin is also shrouded in mystery. The Archdrake sect's origin is easier to piece together. They are descendants of the Drakeblood Knights. The openly public miracle replenishment says this miracle is used by the resolute Lindelt cleric knights when fighting on the front lines. There is a story passed down through generations claiming this band of knights once felled a poisonous dragon which menaced an entire nation. But the slumbering dragon shield, which is used in secret rituals, tells us the truth. shield of the Archdrake sect of Lindeld, represents a slumbering dragon, and is intended for use in covert rituals. The fools who woke the slumbering dragon earned not only its ire, but also the destruction of the entire country. The survivors buried their wrongdoings in the past, and, in a show of terrible conceit, attempted to make amends by carrying on the knowledge of the wasted land. So, after Haiti was subsumed by water, Lindeld would have been founded as its successor, and I think that Gwynevere and her family died with their kingdom. If they didn't, then it would probably be easy to find some reference to her. I mean, the names of Lloyd and Caifa were preserved by the church. Why wouldn't Gwynevere's name be? Lindeld is far from the sacrosanct bastion of faith that they claim to be. They invade, practice sorcery, and, what is probably the most telling sign, they make people disappear for asking too many goddamn questions. They have a secret to protect, and it would make sense to kill for it if it involved the fact that they were responsible for the deaths of their former gods. And to finally talk about the painting itself, it was left in Orlando under the care of the painting guardians and the bountiful gaze of Gwynevere's statue. If Priscilla really was born of Gwynevere, like myself and many others have theorized, then it's feasible to assume that it could have been procured by the Princess of Sunlight after she had settled in Haiti. It would be feasible but unlikely without a more substantial connection. I believe that said connection would be the painting guardian that invades you in Aurea's keep. These guardians had a very specific purpose in life, a purpose they lived and died for. It seems very unlikely that they would simply abandon the painting, but if the painting had been brought to Haiti, it's likely that they would have come with it. Their garb is now called the Monastery Set, the same monastery that holds the dark secrets of Lindeld's foundation, guarded by the Archdrake sect. And remember Falcon, the dark diver I mentioned earlier? Remember I said he had cleric items from Lindeld? Well, they were Archdrake sect items, and he now holds the Sunset Staff, a staff prone to hexes that was created in Aurea's keep, making him a direct link between Lindeld and Aurea, and between Aurea and the pilgrims. Sulyvahn came from inside the painting, and he came into our world somewhere. If I'm right about all of this, then he may as well have left the painting while it was being held in Aurea's keep. That would place him in direct contact with the Hexers and also with Soulgeyser, which would later become Soulstream as further evidence of him being the first of the scholars from the Grand Archives in Dark Souls 3. And before we move on, the Drain Knights and Ashandra's picture would be a couple more small connections between Sulyvahn and Drangleic. I know it's a lot to process, I know it seems like I'm asking a lot, but if you take the time to look at the evidence, I'm confident you'll see that everything really is connected, that they didn't let us down, and that we don't have to resort to time is convoluted every time we hit a bump on the road. The lore is there, we just have to look for it. The most iconic figures related to the Dark are arguably the Primordial serpents, and we can't really talk about the Dark without talking about them. But they operate from the shadows without leaving much evidence behind, so we're gonna have to infer most of our conclusions. First and foremost, I must readdress the fact that they are not here to serve us. Not men, not gods, the serpents serve no one. I know we all want to be special little humans at the center of everything, but this is Dark Souls, and it really should come as no surprise that we aren't. I have mentioned before my position that both Kaf and Framt were working together, and while talking about this subject in the forums, it became clear to me that there's no consensus within the community, so I'll just briefly reiterate my points. I know they both present themselves as servants to their respective lords, but let's consider the facts. Framt's plan culminates with your death, so he isn't really serving the lord. One could say he's serving the First Flame, but he appears as a servant to the Dark Lord in the Dark Lord ending, so he's just flat out lying his scaly ass off about that as well. Kaf's plan apparently culminates with you disappearing into obscurity as the First Flames continues to be linked and the search for a true Dark Lord continues, for, in Dark Souls 1, you were never a true lord at all. All you did was to walk away from the flame, but if their plan was to let it fade, they have always controlled the way to the kiln, so they could simply let it be. They wouldn't even need a Dark Lord for that. If the serpents were going through the trouble of finding a Dark Lord at all, then it would seem that his purpose would be to usurp the First Flame. something we could never have known prior to the last entry of the series, but now that we know this is part of their end goal, then I think it should become really easy to see that this has been the reason for their games all along. Why would they be working together? Why would they advocate to both the linking and the fading of the first flame? Because they needed to find Dark Lords they hoped would be able to wrestle it from its mantle, and they needed to keep the flame alive in order for the Dark Lord to usurp it at all. By playing both sides, they kept culling the powerful, pitting their champions against each other, destroying all resistance before it could ever become a threat to them. And their presence can still be felt in Dark Souls 3. There are primordial serpent statues in Lothric and in this room, deep within the Ringed City, where the presence of Lothric banners and this hole, which would be a nice fit for a serpent's head to preach onto these pews, would connect the serpents to the foundation of the kingdom. And their link to the Lord of Hollows is pretty hard to deny, considering that Uria's mission seems to be Koth's dying wish. The last part on the serpent's plan that we get to witness is the usurpation of fire. And in order to get there, certain assets have been deployed. The first item on the list is 100% circumstantial. I have no hard evidence to support this claim, and I ask you only to consider the possibility. I believe that the serpents have created the first flame. In Dark Souls 1, the covetous serpent rings hinted at a possible grudge between serpents and dragons, and in Dark Souls 3, even more so. They couldn't fight the dragons themselves, but through the first flame, they had given the gods the power that they needed to do so in their stead, and now they're taking that power back. All great souls eventually turn into kindling, stoking the fires of the first flame. It's no wonder that the world is getting smaller. With each cycle, there's literally less of it to go around. It's no wonder that now, after all this time, we would finally hear about this soul of cinder that the first flame would have produced. For now, after so many powerful souls have been thrown into it, the first flame finally has the power to do so. They have always controlled the way to the kiln. They have kept the flame alive as they kept the cycle going. They hold the knowledge that is necessary to take it, and as far as we know it, they have no soul, just like the ancient dragons that predate the flame. If they didn't create it, then who did? The way I see it, it was either them or a divine intervention by an undisclosed god, looking to go Old Testament on the everlasting dragons of yore. Personally, I'll stick with the serpents till a better candidate is found. Moving along, we find the undead pawns and the tool that has been used to guide them, the bonfires. The journey of an undead has always traced the bonfires, which are fueled by the bones of the undead. Their urge to seek bonfires is so strong that these same bones can become enchanted with a homeward instinct. The curse slowly erodes one's memory until even one's birthplace is reduced to a figment of a clouded past, but the bonfires are constant, a beacon for the tragically afflicted. The mark of the bonfires is the coiled sword, a sword that has been found within the first flame itself and that predates the throneless lords. They have always been around and always will be to the end of times. Where do they come from? Who's placing these swords that light the way to the undead? The bonfire's existence is intertwined with that of the undead, and in Dark Souls 1, the serpent was called a symbol of the undead. These two were the creation of the primordial serpents. Who else would have been able to? Who else would have been present from beginning to end? Who would have the necessary knowledge, and who else would have an invested interest in guiding the undead to the first flame? As a side note, I believe that the sword itself may have been inspired by the rod of Asclepius, who was known for bringing men back from the dead. And lastly, we get to talk about the chosen undead and the champion of Ash. It would seem, at first, that given our position as the Dark Lord, everything would revolve around us, but don't get your hopes up. Remember, I've shown you we're more likely just tools in somebody else's plan. All the chosen undead that may have reached the kiln of the first flame throughout the ages would have done so for nothing, always misguided without even asking why, at least until the advent of unkindled ash. Now we are special, right? We're champions of Ash, guided to greatness by Londor, by Yo, by Uria and Koth, without even asking why. But if you do stop to ask yourself why, then you'd have to ask yourself, why does it have to be me? Why does it have to be man and Ash? To start answering these questions, we must look at the Pilgrims of London and the reason behind their pilgrimage. Why were they headed to Lothric Castle? What did they hope to find in there? We know that they are supposed to die, and that they would do it by granting the Dark Sigil to one who is unkindled, but why would they even have this power to begin with? That's because the unkindled were covertly created with the express purpose of receiving said sigil. As I have stated before, the Queen of Lothric would have been working in tandem with London, and that explains how the pilgrims would know about the existence of the unkindled, about how to identify them, and how to bring out their true strength at all. All parts of this puzzle are actually connected and can be traced back to the demon ruins, where all the grus, crabs and trees seem to be naturally ambered. We know that Sulyvahn has been there because of the giants beside the ballista, next to the hole that leads directly into AzureFelt, and he would be the one to bring the knowledge of Amber into Lothric. We know he's connected to the Kingdom of Lothric through his position as first of the scholars of the Grand Archives, and to the Queen through untended graves, given the fact that she was the one to tend to those graves and the presence of cathedral grave wardens. This connection also helps us understand why the Chaos Blade and the Black Knights can be found in the untended graves, and why Prince Lothric's robes of prayer look so much like the gold-hemmed black set from Dark Souls 1's Demon Wings. Sulyvahn has already been linked to the pilgrims in this very same video and others that came before, and the Queen can also be linked to those pilgrims through the Hollow's ashes that can be found in her graveyard's shrine. Once again, I realize that's a lot, so just take a moment to take it all in before we move on. All things considered, the important facts would be that the Primordial serpents are behind Londor's agenda, that the Pilgrims of London exist to grant the Dark Sigil to the Unkindled, and that the Unkindled exist to usurp the flame. And lastly, man. Why does it have to be man? Remember I said humanity is a distinguishing feature and it would become relevant later in the video? Well, it just got relevant. The key isn't man itself, but the humanity within. This black sprite is called humanity, but little is known about its true nature. If the soul is the source of all life, then what distinguishes the humanity we hold within ourselves? Black flames born from the abyss bear no shadow. They are said to be the impenetrable fires of humanity. This pyromancy tome is dark and delves into the depths of man, where an untouchable flame resides. As an opposing force to the first flame, the abyss has a black flame of its own. This black flame resides within our humanity and is precisely what would allow us to thrive through the waning of the first flame. But the dark age of man is a lie. After the first flame fades, only grey ash will remain. The truth is they are both fading, so the Dark Sigil was created. It leaks out humanity, bringing out the deep black flame within to bear. Closer than ever to what truly makes us human, we even lose our shadows, for in truth, we are closer to the abyss itself, and in the abyss, there are shadows none. But the sigil is twofold, and as it leaks humanity, it also fills itself with the curse of the undead, which is triggered by the dark sign, a seal of fire cast upon our flesh by the gods, the fire of the gods being the first flame. Our unkindled nature drives us toward the fire, and our dark sigil allows us to finally take in the first flame. Flame, oh flame. With both flames together inside a single vessel, they will finally be complete, and who knows what powers can be unleashed, what new worlds can be created. Hi, and thanks for watching. This was my most speculative video yet, so I understand if many, if not most of you, are a little bit confused by these theories. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. If you're not new to the channel, you may have noticed a lack of custom animations. To be honest, that level of production just requires way too much time of me and I don't really get enough exposure back from them. Also, I want to start talking about other games and I just can't do that with the other games. You may also have noticed a change in the pacing of the video. That's for the same reason I want to start talking about other games, and as much as I like the way I've been doing things, I just don't think it fits with the other genres. Thanks again for watching. If you like my videos, just please share them with your friends. Thank you, my single patron, Vinny, the bearer of the curse. Thanks for believing in me. I almost have enough to buy a microphone. And I guess that's that. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.